Lemonada.
The voices of those locked up in the U.S. prison system, some as minors, have been all but written off, but no more. Written Off is a new podcast from Lemonada and Black Bar Mitzvah that shines a light on formerly incarcerated young writers. Hosted by award-winning author and journalist Walter Thompson Hernandez, each episode features an interview with a talented writer while creatives like John Legend, Issa Rae, Jay Ellis, and Keke Palmer perform their work. Vulnerable poems and honest stories play out against a tailored soundtrack with original music. Written Off premieres July 14th. Here's an exclusive clip. To hear more, search for Written Off wherever you're listening right now.
15, 8, and 2. That's it. That's the sentence. No, really, that's the sentence. Jimmy's sentence. 15 years, 8 months, and 2 strikes. You'll hear those numbers again today. They'll echo for you the way they once did for Jimmy when the judge first handed it down almost half his life ago. The way they echoed for me one Friday morning back in April when he and I sat across from each other on a couple of couches in an office off of Vermont Avenue. I'm Walter Thompson Hernandez, and I'm a product of Los Angeles, or LA, as we call it here. I used to write for the New York Times. I wrote a book about a group of friends called the Compton Cowboys. I hosted a show called California Love, and I'm now directing my first film. I rep LA in everything that I do. Our people, our stories, and the creativity we often find here. And sometimes in the most unexpected of places. But most of all, I love how this city is a walking, breathing juxtaposition. Like here, off Vermont and Sunset, at the Inside Out Writers headquarters, where, in the heart of Hollywood, you get a true mix of opposition, coexisting, the continual wailing of sirens mixed with car sound systems, all blended together, and the rural sounds of roosters clucking from backyards. For real, roosters in Hollywood. Inside Out Writers, or IOW, is a nonprofit organization known as the best secret to drastically reducing LA's recidivism rate. On the surface, it teaches creative writing classes to currently incarcerated young people inside LA County's juvenile halls. It continues those classes on the outs, as they say, once they're released. But it's created something more than that. To some, it's like a church for writers that keeps every student coming back. And IOW Executive Director Jimmy Woo couldn't embody that more. He was part of its inaugural class of students more than 26 years ago. Since then, hundreds of young people with similar stories have passed through his halls. Their vibrant pictures plastered on the walls surrounding the couches that we're sitting on, creating a sense of love and family that fills anyone the moment you walk in. I'll talk to 13 of these writers over the course of this show about their work, about how writing has impacted their lives. But this show, for me, is also really personal. In some ways, I feel like a lot of the writers who I've spoken to. I was once a high school dropout and spent time getting arrested for everything from graffiti to fighting. My best friend, Danny, used to call me from juvie every week. And I still remember the first time he called and hearing his voice on the other end of the phone. He sounded distant, removed, almost like he was calling from somewhere very far away from the streets we used to walk. Danny wrote in his free time. He wrote me letters. He wrote his older sister, his mom, his dad. He wrote to pass time, and, more importantly, as a way to cope. Writing is what gave him hope. You'll hear similar stories throughout this show. Stories of life, and pain, and joy, and redemption. I'm also really excited to surprise each of the writers with recordings of celebrities reading their pieces. I'm talking John Legend, Issa Rae, Jay Ellis, and many more. So let's kick things off with actor Randall Park and our first guest, Jimmy Woo. This is written off.
At the sound of the door opening to our holding tank, my conversation with the 3 other inmates came to an abrupt end. Looking over my shoulder, I saw my lawyer walk into the room. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'm doing pretty good," I replied. We talked about nothing in particular for a few seconds until I finally popped the question. "So what's going to happen today?" He told me that I would be getting sentenced unless there was some good reason for me not to. We went over what he would present to the judge on my behalf, and when there were no more questions that I needed an answer to, he told me that he was going to find my co-defendant's attorney. "You'll be coming out soon," he said. And with that, he left the room. 30 minutes later, the door to the holding tank opened once more. "Gentlemen, step out," a voice called. My co-defendant and I exited the tank, and the bailiff that was standing outside the room told us to turn around and put our hands behind our backs. As the cold steel of the handcuffs were snapped onto my wrists, my heart started to pound furiously, and I thought to myself, this is it. The bailiff led us to the door of the courtroom as I silently said a prayer for everything to go well. Opening the door, he ushered us inside, and when I looked to see who occupied the seats for the public, I saw unfamiliar faces. Feeling depressed, I asked myself, where is everybody? Glancing at my lawyer, I noticed that he was nodding his head towards the door that led us to freedom. The bailiff removed the handcuffs and told me to take a seat in the chair that was directly in front of the judge. The sounds of a door opening filled my ears, as did the shuffling of several feet. I sneaked a peek to see who had come in, and I was amazed by what I saw. Every chair in the courtroom contained someone that had come to the court to give me support. People were lined up against the walls, smiling whenever I made eye contact with them. The whispering died, and everyone settled down, and my judgment began. The judge opened up by acknowledging me and my crime partner's presence in the courtroom. She informed everyone that if there were no legitimate reason for us not to get sentenced, that would be taking place today. My attorney stood up after we agreed that there didn't seem to be a good excuse and began pleading for the judge to allow me to be housed in youth authority until I reached the age of 25. From my viewpoint, he presented a strong statement that should have been taken under serious consideration, but every word that came out of my attorney's mouth seemed to go through one of the judge's ears and out the other. She kept referring to the law book that stated how I would not be eligible to go to YA because of my age, and because I would not be able to serve all my time by the age of 25. As my lawyer continued to argue that this law was passed well after my incarceration, every hope and dream that I had for my sentence to be reduced, or for me to be housed in YA, slowly vanished. The full realization of what was taking place hit me like a car ramming into a concrete wall at full speed. In a few minutes, I would be a criminal for the rest of my life. In the book that I have to carry for the remainder of my existence, I will be labeled as a convict, a felon. While I was fighting my case, I still had a clean record despite being locked up. Now, my record will forever contain this one mistake that I made when I was a young and naive adolescent. I thought about all the people that were sitting in the courtroom giving me their support and love, and I lost complete control of my emotions. The tears that I had held in for so long streamed down my face as I cursed myself for letting these people down. Why couldn't the judge see that the young man sitting before her was not the same person that had entered juvenile hall 2 years ago? Why couldn't she see that I had dreams of getting out and getting my life together to be somebody? After a long and hard battle of trying to get me housed in youth authority, my attorney finally realized that the judge's mind had already been made up. She was like a tree stump that refused to be moved. Her final decision was to send me to state prison for 15 years, 8 months, and 2 strikes. We asked if she could recommend fire or work camp, which she did, but that doesn't seem likely because of the fact that I don't fit the criteria due to the number of years I have to serve. A week or two ago, I thought of 15, 8, and 2 as numbers and nothing but numbers. Sitting in the court with my life in someone else's hands made me open my eyes to the harsh reality of what these numbers really mean. Those numbers that at one point in my life meant nothing were now representing the number of years that I would be away from my loved ones. The worst of the worst had happened, and there was nothing I could do about it. Through tear-filled eyes, I looked at the judge and silently asked her, "Why couldn't you give me a chance? Why are you taking 15 years of my life for one mistake? I know that I have to pay a penalty for what I did 2 years ago, but why can't you look at me and see that I've now changed? Thank you for that. Thank you for destroying my future, too." Now, a few hours later, I'm in some ways relieved that everything's over with. There's no more worrying about how much time I'll get or where I'll be sent. The decisions have been made, and I have to live with that. There's only one more thing that I can do, and that is to stay strong. For my parents, for my brother, and most importantly, for myself. Because I have to.
Jimmy,
Yeah.
how you feeling?
A little emotional right now. Haven't heard someone else read that out loud before. And though it was so long ago, it just really feels like it, happened just yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's just like, reflecting on it right now.
Was there something different about hearing someone else read your words?
Yeah. There was definitely something different because, reading it myself, it's just like something that I created. And I think that it takes some of the emotion out of it because I'm more kind of like paying attention to whether or not it's flowing correctly, if I'm presenting the message that I want in my writings. But hearing it from somebody else, it was more for me to like kind of put myself in a reader's or a listener's, type of seat, where I can appreciate it a different way.
Is there something about reliving that moment and hearing someone read your words that kind of took you to that moment, in court, in the holding cell?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that after having gone through that and it being so long ago, I didn't really think back to that moment in quite some time. And, I think it's just like, it was triggering in a way, for me to go back to that moment, when I was 18 years old. And yeah, not sure whether or not I was going to be able to make it. And then, what was particularly difficult was when I was talking about like my brother and, unfortunately he's no longer with us. He passed about 2.5 years ago. So I was able to spend time with him, after I did come home from prison, but it was just hard to just think about him, and what happened to me, the way that it, kind of like impacted my entire family. So it was like a flood of all those memories coming in, and yeah.
Because like there's a moment in your piece when you write about the sort of like surprise and I think maybe joy that you feel when you see people, there to support you. And is that kind of what you thought about right now?
Absolutely. And it just also reminds me of how fortunate, and privileged that I've been. Because I think about the number of individuals who go through that same thing. And, when I glanced at that courtroom when I first got let out, it was empty. But then obviously, people did, come in to show me their support to where it was filled to capacity. And I just think about how many people are sitting in that same seat being sentenced or being, judged. And they absolutely have nobody, So, yeah, I thought about that as well.